Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor. Now, let's discuss nature and its role in the novel. Where sex does not exist, the simple, rustic, jolly characters that bring it alive seem to be carriers of old traditions. In the novel, the Wessex countryside has not felt the impact of industrial revolution. Nature and man still live in close proximity to each other. So Wessex is a place where nature and man both live in harmony. Nature, its abundant generosity and its energy are embodied in Gabriel Oak. It is the same with Bathsheba to some extent, but she deviates through her impulsive acts later. So she is equally a woman rooted in the rural soil. She is self-confident, vivacious and beautiful. But unlike the calmness of nature, she reveals an impulsive and whimsical self, as a result of which she is restless, agitated, and she needs a calming influence. Gabriel Oak is considered as if an embodiment of the generosity and energy of nature. It was more or less the same for Bathsheba, but because of her impulsive behavior, we cannot compare her to the calmness of nature. Now comes Boldwood. So in the early part of the novel, he represents the best of nature in his disciplined and confident way of living. That is, living far away from the madding emotions of love and passion, jealousy and vengeful anger. But later, his passionate love and the jealousy associated with him changes him. There is also a mention regarding the title, as if it is adapted from Elegy written in Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. I hope you know the meaning of this term, madding. It means frenzied. This serene countryside is far removed from the hurly-burly of the city. Hardy shows the rural peace of the countryside that is not disturbed by the inhabitants. That is, the countryside and its peace and serenity is portrayed in this particular novel. So, there are more than 4 themes expressed in this particular novel. These themes include unrequited love, concept of class structure, catastrophe, fate, etc. So what do you mean by unrequited love? It can be considered as if a love that is not reciprocated. Alright? So Gabriel Oak's love, Boldwood's passion for Bathsheba, Bathsheba's misplaced love for Troy, and finally poor Fanny's innocent love for Troy, all these illustrate this theme of unrequited love, that is, unreciprocated love. Now comes the concept of class structure. So the examples from the text that denotes this class structure include Bathsheba's early rejection of Oak. Remember, she rejected him when he first proposed. Then Farmer Boldwood's consciousness of his superiority. Then Troy's attitude towards the rural folk. Bathsheba's treatment of her farm workers. She was more or less a lady who was kind of, what do you say, pompous or strict with people. She was not very kind-hearted for that matter. So all these are examples of the class structure. Now comes catastrophe. What do you mean by the term catastrophe? It can denote destruction, or devastation, etc. Yeah. So Gabriel's loss of his entire flock of sheep at the beginning of the novel, this is what changes his life later, remember? Yes. Then nature's fury and the stormy nights that bring Gabriel and Bathsheba together when they begin to appreciate this commitment and loyalty despite her rejection of his proposal to marry him. So it is after the nature's fury and stormy nights that Bathsheba, later begins to appreciate Gabriel Oak and his commitment and loyalty. So if you read the text or the unit, you will definitely be able to understand this area. Then, as we discussed in our previous session, fate also plays a crucial role here. So this is page number 100. Yeah. So fate, chance and circumstance rule Hardy's rural world. Fanny turns up at the wrong church to marry Sergeant Troy. This is one incident. If this marriage had taken place, one of Bathsheba's options would have been removed and Fanny's tragedy wouldn't have happened. So that is fate. So destiny brings a happy ending to the story with Bathsheba's acceptance of Gabriel and her marriage to him. So these are the main themes expressed in this novel. So this particular novel has elements of both tragedy and comedy, hence it can be considered to be a tragi-comedy. In this respect, Far From the Madding Crowd explores different human emotions and experiences, that is of love, rejection, depression and anger. Far From the Madding Crowd starts on a tragic note with the memorable image of Gabriel Oak and his tragedy, but gradually it all comes in place and it turns out to be a happy ending for Gabriel Oak and Bathsheba. The happy ending after a series of tragic events makes almost everything turn out for the best for the protagonists. Alright, so here in this section we have discussed the summary of the novel Far From the Madding Crowd in brief. We also analyzed the role of nature in the novel. We focused on the one-to-one correspondence between nature and the four main characters. Who are the four main characters? Bathsheba, Oak, Troy and Bolwood. And we also considered Far From the Madding Crowd as a combination of elements of tragedy and comedy. Now let's move on to Hardy's philosophy. This is important. So, Hardy's novels go beyond the plot to articulate his philosophy and his views on life. The novel in question, that is Far From the Madding Crowd, raises many questions about society, religion, morals, and ends on a positive note. What is the positive note? That virtue garners rewards, as evidenced in Oak's happy union with Bathsheba, as a reward for leading a life of goodness, humility, loyalty, and selfless love. The 19th century, as you know, was an age of transition. This transition is evident in the following changes, that is, the change from an agrarian rural life to industrial urban life, the change from the belief in God as the creator to the belief based on Darwin's origin of species, the change from a rural society to an urban society, the change from an acceptance of life's ups and downs as the working of a beneficent, omnipotent deity to questioning the very function of that. Hardy was primarily a novelist and therefore it is appropriate to describe him as a philosophical novelist. The novel form gave him the opportunity to reflect on Victorian society, its morals, ethics, and worldview. For that matter, he can be considered as if a Victorian realist as well. So, even if he was a Christian by birth, he was more or less under the influence of Charles Darwin. As a result, he lost his Christian faith. He was an extensive reader who had read the ancient Greek tragedies, Shakespeare's works, etc. So, his conception of human life was shaped in part by his extensive critical reading of the Bible as well. His novels are full of biblical allusions, and Far From the Madding Crowd is also rich in its biblical allusions. One of the earliest appraisals of Hardy's philosophy was by Ernest Bregneck. Okay, this person was the first to assess or criticize Hardy's philosophy. Hardy's critical vision of life was deeply rooted in his Hellenic and pagan sympathies of the rural countryside. So, in his Wessex novels and stories, Hardy's vision of an old rustic England was essentially pagan. Shared Matthew Arnold's ideal of Hellenic paganism with its emphasis on the development of a complete man with a harmonious body and soul. He preferred Auguste Comte's religion of humanity as a substitute for Christianity. One more aspect of his philosophy is that of determinism. Determinism, also referred to as necessitarianism, is the philosophical doctrine that all events, including human choices and decisions, are necessarily determined by external forces acting on them. Chance is for Hardy everything over which man has no control. It is not that fate is always sinister, but the fact is man cannot overcome his fate. Yes. He represents life's happenings as events that are unalterable and believed that man cannot take any preventive measures to change or stop them. Hence, his philosophical outlook was certainly deterministic, pessimistic, and tragic, yet it offered a possibility of positive morality. Sums up the study of Far From the Madding Crowd. We already discussed the life and works of Thomas Hardy. We discussed the summary of this novel. We analyzed this novel, and we had a deep understanding of the character sketches of all the main characters of this novel, and we also had a brief overview of Hardy's philosophy. With that, we come to the end of this session. We'll discuss George Bernard Shaw's Arms and the Man in our next session. So with that, we come to the end of this session.